The Trump DOJ is blatantly breaking the Epstein Transparency Law. That's how we are starting 2026. The law had two deadlines. The Trump administration has clearly broken both of them. The first was to turn over the documents. As everyone has seen, that is not happening really at all in any meaningful way. And second, because Congress wanted this to be fast, they said, give us the documents first, redact what you have to, and there are rules on that. And 2 weeks later, you can explain your redactions because there's got to be a process. Anybody who's seen any of the memes joking about this knows that if you could just redact everything, it would be pointless. And the DOJ, and this is a sign of malfeasance, of not even trying that hard to look like they're complying, let alone really comply, has blown through the redactions deadline.
We're reacting to Ari Melber breaking down how Trump's DOJ is openly violating federal law to cover up the Epstein files. They've blown through both legal deadlines, released less than 1% of documents, and Trump's former defense lawyer Todd Blanche is running the cover-up from inside the Justice Department. Congress passed this with veto-proof bipartisan support, and Trump was forced to sign it. But now they're just ignoring it.
So they're not even providing what is very easy. Anyone who's litigated in court and even in basic civil cases knows that you can provide supporting information. It could be a letter explaining the documents or certain redactions, privilege, file, etc. I'm not going to get into all the details, but basically they're not doing that either. We are in a period now where it is a full-blown cover-up in public. This is like Watergate meets sex trafficking. Donald Trump was forced to sign that law because he lost. There was a veto-proof majority. The Trump DOJ had already said or claimed that they had done a lot of this review. There may be new documents that come when you, of course, have a new federal law requiring materials, maybe a broader set of documents. But they'd said previously when Pam Bondi was on defense in writing that they'd done a big Epstein review. And now what they've trickled out basically looks like less than 1% by their own numbers.
They claimed the review was done. They said they were ready. And they've released less than 1% while missing both deadlines. This isn't incompetence. It's deliberate obstruction. When the government violates its own laws about a sex trafficker's files, that's not a scandal. That's a constitutional crisis.
They are caught telling, blatant fabrications because Todd Blanche, who's clearly using a run-out-the-clock strategy, which is exactly what he did when he was Trump's defense lawyer facing Jack Smith. It's not, oh, we're right and can win on the facts or the substance. It's, oh, we'll play games and run out the clock and we'll either deal with this later if we have to or not at all. And Blanche is now flipped from being a criminal defense attorney facing the DOJ to being at the DOJ. And so when people allege that the criminals are now running the operation or the bad guys are in charge or any of those things, Mr. Blanche, of course, is a lawyer and he can do his job there, but he certainly looks like he is involved in a cover-up. Whether it breaks criminal law is a separate question, but it's now established he's breaking the law that Congress passed, the Epstein Transparency Act.
Todd Blanche was Trump's criminal defense lawyer using delay tactics against Jack Smith. Now he's inside the DOJ using those same tactics. Trump's personal lawyer, who helped him avoid accountability, is now running the Justice Department's response. First they said 2 million documents, then 5.2 million, constantly moving goalposts. This is literally the swamp protecting itself.
So that's a big deal to be the person in charge of this after Pam Bondi was sort of pushed aside, but both of them in violation clearly of this federal law, which was signed by the president they report to. That 1% number I mentioned is significant because clearly there was enough pressure that the DOJ under Trump in December didn't want to look like they were doing literally zero. So Blanche went on Fox and said, hey, we're starting, it's going to take time. And then they put out pictures. They put out material that they knew would get some press and make it look like, oh, here's something new. Bill Clinton in a hot tub or Michael Jackson and others. And now that we see how little they've put out, it's clear that there's other material just separate from the law. Just let's be practical. There's plenty of other material and documents that wouldn't be all that interesting or recent or have much to do with Donald Trump. And they didn't put any of that out either. What they focused on were some materials like FBI reports and other things, and I did a breakdown on some of that previously. And then photos that they obviously knew would get attention. And now, going into January, they're admitting there's millions more documents. They're basically trying to set up slowest possible process. And then eventually, what Congress can do, of course, and the victims' advocates who've been so effective can be a part of this and put a spotlight on it, is take the DOJ to court. And that's happened in many cases that involve documents or transparency.
Republican Thomas Massie and Democrat Ro Khanna wrote this law, and they're threatening $5,000 daily fines for contempt. Even Lauren Boebert is breaking with Trump. Congress passed this with veto-proof support because they knew Trump's DOJ couldn't be trusted. If Biden's DOJ did this, MAGA would scream about crimes. The standard has to be the same.
One of the legal problems we're following, though, is if the Trump DOJ is dragging this out, then you're going to court and you're trying to get a ruling to make them do what they're slowly doing. And then if they violate that, you're trying to get sanctions. So you could see contempt or other things where people who work at the DOJ, who are effectively part of this cover-up now and violating the law, would face sanctions. You could be personally fined. You could even be incarcerated, although that usually comes as a last resort. Most judges don't leap to that. And then from there, you can imagine the case being appealed. If it was negative towards Trump, they could also still try to appeal it up to the Supreme Court, which could go fast or slow. We've seen them help Trump on other issues. So we're watching this cover-up in real time. It obviously makes the president look bad after he lost this whole battle in December, and it drags it into 2026 going into the midterms. And so the same questions that people had, and some of this stuff is technical if you want to talk about litigation rules, and some of it's obvious. The same thing people said initially. People were skeptical they'd get any information. They expected a cover-up. And it makes Trump look very guilty. We don't know what he's hiding exactly, although we do know he had already questionable interactions and relationship with this individual. So that, for many politicians, would just look bad, even before you get to the question of whether there was any legal violation. But what is it that Trump is willing to risk so much for rather than get this done and over? Is there some smoking gun set of documents in there about things that people could imagine or other things? And he's willing to go into the midterms and have this drag on for months.
Trump called Epstein a terrific guy. They partied at Mar-a-Lago for years, and Epstein's emails say Trump knew about the girls. Trump is willing to risk a constitutional crisis and go into midterms with this scandal rather than release the files. That tells you there's something damaging in there. Innocent people don't blow through federal deadlines and violate transparency laws to hide documents about their sex trafficker friend.
Ultimately, this is a case where you have a legal process, which is what do you do when the government is in charge of something? Who watches the watchers? And this isn't the first time this has happened, of course. There are many, many cases throughout history where some cover-ups have worked and some have failed over time. And some cover-ups, like Watergate, ended up going so poorly that in hindsight, people who were on Nixon's side said, gosh, they should have found some other way to deal with this because it made it worse. So some cover-ups fail. This is a little different because there's such strong public interest and it's bipartisan. Some of the president's own supporters and former supporters want these documents, the moral clarity of the victims groups, and then the bipartisan coalition in Congress, which already rejected Trump once on this. So it's striking that so many years after Epstein's suspicious death in prison under the Bureau of Prisons run by the Trump administration, and by the way, the Epstein law asks for more information on that aspect of this, and that much of that has not come out. But it's striking that this many years later, this is still a live issue. And that's partly, again, remember, because of how it has been covered up, and partly because of the somewhat unusual coalitions and the public interest, and the internet has covered this more sometimes than traditional media initially, and we've seen then people react to that. And we live in a democracy, so what people care about and talk about sooner or later, even in a democracy that sometimes seems broken, still matters.